The text came through at 10:47 in the morning, a screenshot of her bar exam results with a single line underneath. It's official now. Sienna meant free in more ways than one. Free from studying, free from stress, and based on what happened next, free from me. She came home that evening already drunk on champagne and something harder to name. Maybe victory, maybe relief. She walked through the door at 7:42 with her heels dangling from one hand and an expensive bottle in the other. Her makeup was perfect, the kind she never wore when it was just us, and her breath hit me before her words did. "You're still awake," she said, dropping her purse on the floor like I was supposed to pick it up. "Big day for me." I started to say we should celebrate together, but she was already handing me an envelope. Thick paper, embossed seal, no attempt to disguise what it was. Divorce papers. Pre-signed by her attorney, just waiting for my part. "You've done what I needed, Elliot," she said, with the emotional range of someone reading a grocery list. "But I have to focus on my career now. You understand." I didn't say anything. Not because I lacked words, I had 8 years worth of them stored up, but because I understood this decision had been made long ago. Probably somewhere between her second-year contracts class and that networking mixer she'd told me was just alumni and appetizers. So I just looked at her. Really looked. Past the makeup she never wore for me, past the designer purse I'd paid for by pawning my father's watch, past the eyes that used to show gratitude, but now just blinked with cool indifference. I pulled a pen from the kitchen drawer and signed every page. Then I handed her the house keys, the parking garage file, and the folder containing her mother's medical records. All of it organized, labeled, color-coded the way I always did things. The way I'd done everything for 8 years while she built her future. She didn't look surprised. What really hurt was the relief on her face, like she'd been genuinely worried I might cry or beg or make a scene that would embarrass her. But I didn't give her that. I put on my coat, stepped into the cold November night, and left. No bags packed, no plan formed, just the weight of 8 years sliding off my shoulders like a badly fastened harness. You spend nearly a decade caring for someone's dying mother, wiping her face when she couldn't do it herself, pushing her wheelchair to appointments, warming soup when she was too weak to stand, cutting pills with surgical precision because the hospice nurse showed you how. And when it's all over, when the credits roll, you don't even get mentioned. That's how it felt, like I'd been edited out of my own story. I turned back once. Through the window, I could see her already on the phone, laughing with someone, the champagne cork rolling across the hardwood, like the punchline to a joke I wasn't part of. I used to think betrayal came with shouting and thrown objects and motel receipts. Turns out sometimes it just wears professional attire, hands you a pre-printed envelope, and says thanks for the ride. People say you should see it coming. Sure, but tell me exactly when you're supposed to detect betrayal when you're working 2 jobs, scheduling chemotherapy appointments, doing her mother's laundry, paying tuition bills, and skipping meals so she can afford her mock trial prep course. When precisely are you supposed to hear the alarm bells while you're cleaning up after her mother's coughing fits and she's in the library studying torts? I'll admit it. I stayed longer than I should have. Not because I was weak, because I believed in her, believed in us. But belief becomes a liability when someone decides to weaponize it. I left everything that night. The house, the car, my name on the mailbox. She could keep all of it. I didn't need reminders and I didn't need revenge. Not then, anyway. Because what she didn't know, what she still didn't know as she laughed about me with her new colleagues, was that I'd taken the only thing that actually mattered. Silence. And silence, when you know how to use it, cuts deeper than any argument. The next Saturday, she threw a party, rented a downtown rooftop space, wore a white pantsuit, played hostess like she'd been born into wealth instead of climbing there on my back. The party was packed with new attorneys, fresh bar passers, HR managers with wandering hands and clipboards. After the 3rd or 4th round of drinks, people got curious. "Hey, Sienna, where's your..." What was his name again? "Elliot," she said, like she was trying to remember a restaurant she'd visited once. Then she clinked her glass with a fork and raised it high. "Elliot," she said louder with that practiced smile she'd been perfecting since orientation week. "Let's toast to the man who made all this possible." A few people clapped, confused and polite. She didn't stop there. He was exactly what I needed at the time. A rock, a wallet, a stepping stone. The laughter that followed had teeth. Someone from the prosecutor's office actually spit out their drink. A paralegal slapped the table. Sienna just sipped her champagne and absorbed the applause like she'd delivered a brilliant closing argument. But not everyone was laughing. One of the new hires, a kid named Christopher who'd transferred from a firm upstate where I'd done consulting work, recognized the name. He didn't say anything, just quietly pulled out his phone, started recording halfway through her speech, and kept his face neutral. Rumors usually start in bathrooms or break rooms. This one started in 4K with crystal clear audio. By Monday morning, the video was circulating through a few private Slack channels, then group texts. Then someone in HR received it with a note. "This seems problematic." Sienna never noticed. She was too busy updating her LinkedIn to Associate Attorney Commercial Litigation and uploading a new bio that read, "Built my life from scratch. No handouts, just hard work." No handouts. That's interesting, considering I once pawned the only thing I had left from my father to cover her final semester textbooks. But sure, just hard work. She even posted a photo from the party with the caption, "Sometimes it just takes a stepping stone." What she didn't realize was that someone in that room had known me. Not well, not recently, but enough. They'd seen the chair I slept in beside her mother's hospital bed. They'd had dinner in our cramped apartment once. They'd watched me carry Sienna's textbooks to her car because she didn't want to scuff her heels before moot court. And now they were watching her stand on my bones like they were marble stairs. The slander didn't even sting anymore. By then I was past pain. What interested me was her confidence. Because when someone thinks the past can't touch them, that's when they're most vulnerable. When they laugh too loud, toast too publicly, speak without thinking consequences. That's when someone, somewhere, always hits record. I didn't rent a motel or crash with friends. I walked into the train station, picked the fourth destination on the departure board, and got on. I don't remember where it went, just that it was far enough for silence to settle properly. I burned my SIM card first, then deleted the email account, then the old identity. Elliot S. Morgan didn't exactly disappear. He shed his skin. I had barely enough savings for 2 months if I was careful about food. So I made a call. Not to family, I didn't have any left. I called a client I'd once helped without charging him, a struggling software startup founder with more ambition than capital and a desperate need for help with contracts, licensing agreements, and equity structures. "I don't want money," I told him. "I want equity, a small percentage, quiet in the background. Let me help you avoid getting destroyed," he agreed. I rewrote his intellectual property clauses, cleaned up his financial records, and caught a clause from a silent investor that would have essentially turned him into an employee of his own company within 6 months. In exchange, he gave me 4% equity and introduced me to 2 other founders in similar desperate situations. That was the first year. Sienna, meanwhile, made partner track at a boutique litigation firm. Fast-tracked because of raw intelligence and relentless discipline. According to her profile in the local legal magazine, the photograph showed her holding an award plaque and gazing off camera like justice itself was whispering privileged information. Her bio claimed she'd risen from adversity and had no safety net. Fascinating word choice, considering I was that net. I didn't follow her career actively, didn't cyberstalk or obsess. I made a rule, no looking backward. But occasionally her face appeared in an article or a panel discussion or a speaking engagement listing. She was climbing the ladder. I was still underground, building the foundation. By year 2, I was sitting in on board calls and advising on mergers and acquisitions under a different name, E.R. Caldwell. I liked how it sounded, forgettable, mild, the kind of name that gets typed in emails and immediately forgotten. But the results stuck around. The companies I worked with started avoiding litigation entirely, negotiating better deals, preventing problems before they materialized. One of them got acquired for 8 figures. The founder tried to wire me a substantial bonus. I told him to reinvest it into a new holding structure I'd help him build quietly. I was becoming the person CEOs called when they didn't want their official lawyers to know how frightened they actually were. I never raised my voice, never filed public complaints, never mentioned her name to anyone, because this wasn't about revenge. Revenge implies emotion and impulse. This was architecture. You don't build skyscrapers because you're angry at the ground. One day I received a call from a finance consultant I'd never met. Said he was handling restructuring for a trust with serious litigation exposure and needed someone to help navigate strategy. Off the books, flexible, discreet, someone with backbone and shadows. Where did you get my name? I asked. From someone who said you saved his company's future. That could have been any of three people by then. That project led to another, then another. I never went on official payroll anywhere. Never signed anything with my real name. But behind closed doors, people started referring to me as the person who made problems disappear. The kind of consultant who didn't ask for credit, just position. By the start of year 3, I had equity stakes in 6 companies, 2 retainer agreements bound by non-disclosure agreements, and an office nobody knew I used. Sienna, meanwhile, had professional headshots, social media hashtags, and press quotations. Just hard work, she liked to say in interviews. But hard work is loud and visible. What I was constructing couldn't be announced. It had to be whispered. Because eventually, without intending to, she was going to walk into a room and discover just how far whispers can travel. The deal was supposed to be straightforward. Sienna even said so in the initial meeting, right before sipping an $18 oat milk latte and telling her assistant to clear Thursday evening for celebration drinks. It was a textbook acquisition. Merrick Technologies, a rapidly expanding software company, was buying out Thornton Manufacturing, a legacy industrial parts supplier with aging leadership and no succession planning. The Thorntons, 2 elderly brothers and a niece, handling public relations like she was still using carbon paper, had been circling retirement for years. Sienna's assignment was to guide the transaction through legal complications. Clean, quick, professional. Instead, the whole thing started rotting from inside. The first delay seemed harmless. One of the Thornton brothers missed a deadline submitting valuation documents. Then their tax records arrived incomplete. Then came a notice of procedural counterfiling. Sienna assumed it was just stubborn old businessmen digging in their heels. But then a letter arrived. 2 pages. Procedurally precise, oddly anticipatory. It flagged a potential violation in the early due diligence requirements. Nothing catastrophic, but phrased cleverly enough to raise serious concerns with Merrick's board of directors. The language was surgical, too surgical for aging manufacturers. Sienna read it 3 times, then passed it to her associate, who frowned and said, "This is actually razor sharp, like professionally sharp." She dismissed it. "We'll respond by end of business. They're bluffing." They weren't bluffing. 3 days later, a second letter arrived, requesting an extension due to unresolved questions about valuation methodology, including potential internal bias toward intangible assets. Translation: they were accusing Sienna's team of structuring the deal to unfairly benefit the buyer. Merrick's general counsel called her directly. "Why does this feel like we're walking into a trap? This was supposed to be a handshake deal. Now we're getting systematically outmaneuvered." For the first time in months, Sienna didn't have an immediate response. She went back through every document her team had drafted, every email logged, every procedural note. Everything looked pristine, strategic, professional. And yet someone was consistently staying 3 moves ahead. She scheduled a late-night emergency session with her team, ordered Thai takeout, drew timelines on glass walls with dry erase markers. At one point, she stood silently staring at a whiteboard covered in arrows and dates and client names. Then, she asked the room, "Who exactly is representing the other side?" Nobody had a clear answer. Her paralegal searched the filings looking for the external firm listed. It was newer, small, discreet. No LinkedIn presence, no promotional website, no flashy attorney biographies, just initials on letterhead and a single contact line. E.R. Caldwell, General Counsel, External. She didn't react to the name, not yet, but she circled it, underlined it twice. Caldwell, she said aloud. Never heard of them. That's the advantage of building in silence. By the time they notice your name, you're already miles ahead and they're staring up at a structure they never saw being constructed. The Thorntons, it turned out, had retained E.R. Caldwell a full year earlier, quietly, through a limited liability company they'd formed specifically to hold their intellectual property rights, which meant Sienna's entire legal strategy had been aimed at the wrong entity from the beginning. She didn't discover this until the next objection landed, citing improper party designation and requesting full case reassignment due to what it diplomatically called procedural misalignment. That's when her junior partner looked at her and said, "They're not just resisting, they're systematically tightening the screws." Sienna's pride activated. She buried herself in counter motions, spent entire weekends redrafting contracts, started snapping at staff members and showing up to the office in sweatpants and exhaustion. But something kept bothering her. Every time she adjusted strategy, the other side adjusted faster. Every clause she thought was airtight came back leaking. Every assumption got dissected before she could defend it. And the worst part, no leaks, no insider information, no dramatic courtroom confrontations, just calm, quiet, relentless pressure. The merger never closed. The deal didn't explode spectacularly. It suffocated slowly. And Sienna, accustomed to being the apex hunter in every negotiation, was now chasing shadows she couldn't identify. The rules had changed, but she still hadn't figured out who was teaching them. Sienna was the last person in the office that night. The only sounds were the air conditioning vents humming and the occasional clink of ice in her glass. The Thai food she'd ordered hours earlier had congealed in its paper container. Her desk looked like a crime scene. Sticky notes everywhere, half-shredded drafts, highlighters bleeding yellow onto contracts she'd been trying to salvage. She'd been attempting to piece together the Thornton disaster for 6 straight hours, and it was still unraveling faster than she could repair it. She reached for the latest courier delivery from opposing counsel. Sealed envelope, red-stamped, marked urgent, in that infuriatingly professional font. She already knew what it would contain: another delay, another procedural trap. She opened it with one hand while still scanning her computer screen, barely glancing down. Then her eyes caught the signature block at the bottom of the closing paragraph. Filed respectfully by counsel for plaintiff, Elliot S. Morgan, General Counsel, Caldwell Holdings. She stopped breathing. Completely froze. No way. Impossible. She leaned close, thinking maybe she'd misread it. Some intern with a similar name, some distant cousin, a coincidence. But there it was again, typed clearly, professionally signed, Elliot S. Morgan. She didn't breathe for several seconds. Her fingers tightened around the page until the paper warped and creased. She read it again, then again. Then she leaned back very slowly in her chair and stared at the ceiling like the explanation might be hiding in the acoustic tiles. Elliot. Her Elliot. The man she'd told, "You're just not part of the future I envision." The man she'd discarded like expired produce. The man she'd publicly toasted about like a glorified assistant who'd outlived his usefulness. She hadn't seen his name in years. He'd vanished so completely it was like he'd been erased from existence. She'd assumed he was probably managing some small business somewhere or living quietly in some forgettable town. But this, General Counsel of Caldwell Holdings, the very entities she'd failed to properly identify during due diligence because they'd concealed their interest behind shell acquisitions and documentation so tight even her senior partner hadn't cracked it. She looked at the document again. No middle initial error, no typo, no alias. It was him. The silence in the room became oppressive, like the walls were pressing inward to witness her reaction. She reached for her phone instinctively but didn't call anyone. What would she even say? Remember the man I abandoned the day I passed the bar? He just systematically destroyed my case. She laughed, but it was bitter and hollow. Her mind raced through memories she'd tried to forget. Him cutting her mother's medication with careful precision, staying awake all night, reviewing her case briefs, bringing soup to her bedside, after 14-hour study sessions, accepting her criticisms like he deserved them, always useful, always calm, and then just gone. No argument, no tantrum, no fight, just a signature and a quietly closed door. She'd thought it was weakness, pathetic even, that she'd broken him so thoroughly he didn't even resist. But now, reading his name at the bottom of a letter that was systematically dismantling her entire case, she understood something different. He hadn't been broken. He'd been busy. Busy becoming the kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to destroy you. The room felt colder. The career she thought she'd built, the job, the speaking engagements, the social media endorsements, all of it suddenly felt like scaffolding constructed on sand. Her hands were shaking, so she pressed them flat against the desk. Then her phone buzzed. Message from her associate. New motion incoming. Caldwell's team wants to compel discovery. Some internal emails have been flagged. She didn't reply. Couldn't. Instead, she turned off the office light, sat in the darkness, and whispered one word. Elliot. The email surfaced on a Tuesday morning. It didn't come from a leak or a whistleblower. It came through proper legal channels. Stamped, formatted, filed as Exhibit B in a motion that arrived in her inbox like a wrecking ball. Motion to compel discovery, filed by counsel for plaintiff, Elliot S. Morgan. Sienna opened it, expecting more of the same strategic delays and corporate formalities. Instead, she found herself staring at a direct quote pulled from one of her own internal communications. They're sentimental and outdated. Drag them through procedural complications and they'll collapse before fourth quarter. Target the niece. She's emotional and risk-averse. Below it, the note from Elliot's legal team read, "We request the court review the above correspondence for evidence of prejudicial negotiation tactics and bad faith conduct relevant under discovery rules." Sienna's stomach dropped before she finished reading the first page. She didn't remember writing that specific email, but the language was unmistakably hers. The cold calculation, the dismissive tone. She'd written it late one night after a strategy meeting, trying to sound tough and clever to her team. Back when she thought the Thorntons were just another failing family business ready to be consumed. She never expected it to surface, certainly not weaponized by her ex-husband in open court. By 9 in the morning, she was in a conference room with 2 senior partners and the firm's general counsel. The atmosphere was tense, sterile, suffocating. Sienna, one of the partners said, folding his hands like he was attempting meditation, "How exactly did this end up in the court record?" "It was internal," she said quietly. "Confidential. Nobody outside the firm was supposed to see it." "It's discoverable if it goes through proper channels," the general counsel snapped, which apparently it did. The senior partner leaned back, pressing his fingers against his temples. "You handed them motivation. You gave them a narrative. You painted yourself as someone operating in bad faith." "He quoted me out of context," she tried. "No," the partner said flatly. "He quoted you perfectly." The word perfectly hit harder than it should have. She wanted to scream, to overturn the table, to do something that would shatter the smug silence her ex-husband had left hanging in that motion. But all she could do was sit there and absorb it. Her colleagues didn't say it explicitly, but their eyes communicated everything. This could cost us the case. This could cost you everything. And the worst part? Elliot never addressed her directly in the filing. No sarcasm, no personal jabs, no dramatic revelations. Just quiet factual deconstruction. It was the legal equivalent of watching your own words transform into a blade, and realizing your ex-husband wasn't just holding it, he was letting you twist it yourself. The judge issued a formal ruling by afternoon. The email was deemed relevant and admissible. Motion to compel granted. Defense instructed to produce all related correspondence and internal communications regarding negotiation tactics. By noon, Sienna's name was circulating in private legal forums. Not publicly visible yet, but the professionals could smell blood in the water. Associates whispered when she walked past. Paralegals paused their conversations mid-sentence. And Elliot? Still no direct communication. No messages, no calls. Just motions filed with surgical precision, delivered quietly, unfolding like the slow, methodical turning of a screw. That night she stayed late again, compiling every email she'd sent in the past 6 months. Every memo, every chat message. Her eyes burned, her wrists ached from typing. Her confidence, that steel-reinforced pride she wore like armor, had started bending under the pressure. She thought about contacting him. Asking for what? Mercy, clarification? But there's no defense against your own documented words. The next morning, someone slid a note under her office door. No signature, no envelope. Just a sticky note with 3 words in block letters. Words are evidence. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. Sienna called the motion a formality, a procedural nuisance. She told her team it would be denied, but they had to at least attempt removing Elliot as the opposing counsel due to prior personal connection. She used exactly those words in the filing. Not marriage, not 8 years of caregiving, just connection, vague and sanitized, like he was some old acquaintance who'd once borrowed her textbook. The judge reviewed the motion without scheduling a hearing, issued a denial in under 48 hours. Just one line: no evidence of current or potential bias preventing impartial legal representation. Motion to disqualify denied. She read it twice, printed it, then fed it through the shredder for no reason except to hear something tear. Then her firm's administrative assistant knocked on her door, face pale, holding another envelope. "It's a notice," he said, "addressed to the managing partners." She took it, opened it, and for the second time in as many weeks, her name felt like a stone lodged in her throat. Professional Oversight Council Appointments Update. Effective immediately, Elliot S. Morgan had been appointed as a standing member of the POC, the regional authority that conducted independent reviews of attorney misconduct and ethical violations across multiple jurisdictions. He was now one of 6 members with voting power, jurisdiction over disciplinary hearings, subpoena authority, public reprimand authority. Her breath stopped. She sat down hard in her chair. She didn't know he'd even applied, didn't know he qualified. The POC wasn't some advisory board you joined through connections or donations. It was reserved for the exceptionally competent, the ones with spotless records and surgical logic, the ones who didn't flinch. Elliot had flinched constantly during their marriage. At least that's what she remembered. Now she wasn't certain about anything. "Do we need to disclose this?" her junior partner asked later that day. "I mean, if things continue deteriorating, it could appear—" "It's coincidental," Sienna interrupted sharply, "and we're not going to act like we're afraid of oversight." But she was afraid. Not just of oversight, of him. Because the moment that notification arrived, she understood the complete picture. This wasn't about winning the case anymore. It wasn't even about the merger. Elliot had positioned himself perfectly. Not to punish her directly, but to watch her fall without ever touching her. If the case collapsed under her supervision, if the Thorntons filed a formal grievance, if Merrick accused her of intentional misconduct, all of it could land in front of the POC, and he'd be sitting there on the review panel. No need to recuse himself unless she filed a direct complaint against him personally. She imagined it. Walking into a hearing room full of attorneys with legal pads and neutral expressions, looking up to see him. Calm, collected, possibly even chairing the session. Her ex-husband, her stepping stone, now with the authority to decide whether she deserved to keep practicing law. The weight collapsed inward. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She'd underestimated him so completely, so thoroughly, that she hadn't just left the vulnerabilities when she walked away. She'd left the architectural plans for her own destruction lying on the table. And he hadn't burned them. He'd filed them, categorized them, used them to construct a foundation stronger than anything she'd ever built. That night, she stayed until well past midnight, sitting alone in her glass office, staring at the skyline she used to think belonged to her. Now it felt borrowed, temporary. The email she sent to HR at 2:03 in the morning was brief. No greeting, no explanation beyond necessity. Effective immediately, I am requesting to recuse myself from the Thornton matter due to previously undisclosed personal conflict with opposing counsel. The next morning, she copied the managing partners, the general counsel, even her executive assistant, to make it appear transparent and responsible. like a diligent attorney catching an oversight before it became a problem. It was too late. By noon, Elliot's team had filed a formal objection to her recusal. The objection wasn't emotional or theatrical, just another meticulously constructed document, delivered like all the others, sharp and cold and surgical. In it, his associate presented a chronological timeline of the case, highlighting Sienna's direct involvement in at least 11 separate strategic decisions made after her office received documents bearing Elliot's signature. More damaging was the attached appendix, a series of internal emails she'd sent, all dated after she'd seen his name, where she continued directing the case, coordinating strategy sessions, and even mocking the Thornton side's approach. The final evidence came from a screenshot of the firm's internal calendar system. Sienna had marked the day she first received Elliot's name with a private notation labeled H. The objection concluded, defense counsel cannot credibly claim ignorance. The issue is not the prior relationship. The issue is the deliberate choice to proceed without disclosure, an ethical violation that jeopardizes both the case and the court's confidence in counsel's integrity. By 4 that afternoon, she was summoned into a closed-door meeting with the firm's management committee. They were polite, corporate, controlled. One of the senior partners, the same person who'd once told her she had the ruthless focus of a sniper, didn't even look up from the conference table. He just asked flatly, "Did you ever formally disclose the relationship, Sienna?" She hesitated. "Not formally," she admitted, "but it wasn't intentional deception. I didn't think it would affect—" "That determination isn't yours to make," another partner interrupted. "The moment his name appeared in any filing, you should have flagged it. Not 6 weeks into negotiations, not after discovery motions, immediately." The general counsel flipped through the documentation in front of him. "You had every opportunity, multiple opportunities. This looks like you concealed a conflict to maintain control of a high-profile case." "It wasn't strategic," she insisted. "It was panic. I was trying to protect the firm's interests." The words hung in the air. Protect the firm. The irony was suffocating, because now the firm was trying to protect itself from her. "Sienna," the general counsel said quietly, "do you understand the optics here?" She didn't answer because she absolutely understood. It appeared she'd hidden a personal conflict to keep managing a lucrative case, then panicked and tried to retroactively cover her tracks when things deteriorated. It suggested her silence wasn't mere oversight, but calculated omission. It meant negligence at minimum, and at worst, ethics violations that could trigger disciplinary proceedings. And everyone in that room knew exactly who would be sitting on any disciplinary board if it reached that point. Nobody said Elliot's name. They didn't need to. By the time she returned to her office, her access to the Thornton case files had been revoked. Her email was flooded with requests for documentation, meeting transcripts, procedural clarifications, timeline verifications. The firm's internal investigation had officially begun. Her assistant wouldn't make eye contact. One of the junior associates who'd previously idolized her walked past and deliberately turned his face toward the wall, like being seen near her carried contamination risk. That afternoon, she locked her office door and sat alone with her phone, staring at the contact entry. She'd never deleted it. Elliot M. No photo, no recent calls, just a string of numbers. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She wanted to scream at him, beg him, apologize, threaten, something. But what could she possibly say? That she didn't mean it? That he was right about her? That she was sorry for the toast, for the arrogance? For not recognizing who she was actually dealing with? The words wouldn't form because she wasn't just losing the case. She was losing her reputation, her career, her grip on everything, and every unraveling thread traced back to the moment she failed to treat him like more than a resource to be depleted and discarded. Now the damage wasn't just internal, it was becoming visible. And all of it, every crack, had started the moment she underestimated the person she'd stood on to reach higher ground. The hearing room was smaller than she'd expected. No grand courtroom, no dramatic wood paneling, just a carpeted conference space with harsh fluorescent lighting, room temperature water pitchers, and a semicircle of silent judgment behind name placards. Sienna sat at the defense table, hands folded neatly, projecting calm she didn't feel. Her blazer was perfectly tailored, her hair immaculate, but internally she was collapsing. Her firm hadn't pulled her from the case. Whether that was strategic calculation, punishment, or optics management, nobody said explicitly. They just told her she was still lead counsel. And now, as opposing counsel prepared their final presentation, all she could hear was paper rustling and the buzz of a failing light fixture overhead. Elliot didn't speak immediately. He stood, buttoned his jacket, walked to the center of the room with that same maddening patience he used to have when organizing her mother's medications by hand. Then he addressed the arbitration panel directly, cleared his throat, and began. In Exhibit F, you'll find a transcription from an audio recording submitted by a third party. An excerpt taken from a social gathering approximately 3 days after defense counsel's bar certification. Sienna's pulse hammered in her ears. She knew what was coming. Still prayed he wouldn't actually do it. Elliot maintained perfect professional neutrality. The following words are attributed to Ms. Sienna M. Langston. He was just a stepping stone. I needed stability while I built something real. Well, the kind that makes oxygen feel scarce. Elliot didn't turn toward her, didn't allow even a flicker of personal emotion to surface. It was pure clinical precision. But the room reacted. One panelist raised an eyebrow. Another shifted uncomfortably. Even the stenographer paused mid-keystroke. Sienna sat frozen, mouth dry, lungs constricted, vision tunneling just enough to blur peripheral details. She felt every eye shift toward her, subtle as settling dust, but unmistakable. He was just a stepping stone. She'd said it drunk and triumphant, surrounded by colleagues who'd laughed at cruelty like it was sophisticated wit. She thought the moment had evaporated into the night like spilled champagne. But someone had recorded it. Someone had preserved it, and Elliot had waited. Not to humiliate her publicly, that would have been simple. He waited until her words were legally relevant, formally admissible, professionally consequential. Now they weren't just cruel, they were evidence. They painted a portrait of an attorney who operated from arrogance instead of ethics, who viewed professional relationships as transactional, who saw human beings as utilities. Sienna opened her mouth slightly, as if to object or explain or simply breathe, but nothing emerged. Elliot didn't elaborate. He let the quote hang in the air like smoke from a fire everyone could now see she'd started herself. When he finished, he returned to his seat without glancing in her direction. She felt her chair sinking. Across the room, her firm's general counsel avoided her gaze. The partner who'd come with her studied a legal pad he wasn't writing on. The associate who'd once admired her sat expressionless in the back row. Nobody moved to support her. Nobody interrupted. And Elliot just took a measured sip of water, opened his briefcase, and began organizing the next exhibit like this was routine procedure. Sienna felt it then. Not just the sting of exposure, but complete isolation. A hollowness carved by the gradual realization that her collapse wasn't caused by one mistake or one adversary. It was every small choice she'd thought wouldn't matter, every shortcut taken, every dismissive remark, every assumption that people you step on will never rise again. And now she was the one being observed, evaluated, quoted, and judged. The rest of the hearing blurred. Motions, statements, procedural conclusions. But nobody remembered anything except that single line. The line that followed her out of the room, down the hallway, into the elevator like a shadow stitched permanently to her identity. By the time she returned to her office, the HR director was waiting inside with a neutral expression and a sealed envelope. No conversation, just policy and procedure. The case didn't explode. It evaporated. A week after the hearing, Merrick Technologies quietly terminated the acquisition. Their general counsel issued a generic statement about strategic recalibration, but everyone understood it was mercy killing. Too much negative exposure, too much liability risk, zero appetite for a deal now radioactive with scandal. Internally, Sienna's firm conducted what the official email called a strategic personnel reallocation. She wasn't fired outright. that would have generated headlines and questions. She was just detached. Her name disappeared from the firm website. Her office got packed by someone else. Her email account deactivated without ceremony. Her severance came sealed behind a non-disclosure agreement so restrictive even rumors couldn't breathe through it. One partner offered a weak handshake in the lobby. Another gave a shoulder touch so brief it felt like static discharge. Nobody said goodbye. Nobody referenced the hearing. Nobody used the phrase stepping stone. They didn't need to. She moved into a sublet apartment half the size of her previous place, with air vents that clanked like they were coughing up judgment. She submitted applications to 5 different firms, got one response, a polite rejection. She started rewriting her resume with softer language, vaguer titles: strategic legal consultant, private advisory counsel, anything to scrub away the stench of exposure. Then, one afternoon, weeks after the silence had started feeling normal, someone knocked on her apartment door. Not the building manager, not food delivery. A woman in a professional blazer, sunglasses still on, no identification badge, no clipboard, just a brown envelope in hand. "For Ms. Langston," she said, and left before Sienna could formulate a question. No sender listed, no postage stamp, just her name, handwritten in black ink. She opened it at the kitchen counter, breath held, stomach tight. Inside was a single document, her original divorce filing from years ago. Same envelope, same pages, same red stamp across the top. But now there was something new at the bottom, just beneath the final signature line in handwriting she'd recognize anywhere. Clean, deliberate, unmistakably his. "Stepping stones don't move backward. Best of luck climbing alone." No signature, no return address, no contact information, just that. Sienna stood there, hands trembling. Not with rage, but with something quieter and heavier. Like gravity had shifted and was pulling her spine down, one vertebra at a time. She read it again. Then, once more. The irony wasn't subtle. He didn't threaten her, didn't raise his voice or retaliate in ways that could be documented or prosecuted. He simply reframed her entire narrative, rearranged it so every piece she thought she controlled turned against her. She'd once called him a stepping stone and believed it completely. But he wasn't beneath her feet anymore. He was above her, behind her, surrounding her. The air itself had changed composition, and she was breathing in the aftermath of a man who never needed to scream to win. She folded the letter back into the envelope, placed it in the drawer beside unopened mail and forgotten takeout menus, then sat at the kitchen table in complete silence and understood finally and irrevocably that some people don't chase revenge. They architect it. And sometimes the person you step on doesn't stay down. Sometimes they just wait until you're high enough that the fall will actually matter. She understands that now.